Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of Talking Hoosier Baseball. I'm Brian Tonsoni, and tonight we have a very special guest. Tonight's guest graduated from the Indiana University School of Business in 1962 and from the Indiana University School of Law in 1965. While at Indiana, he played baseball for the Hoosiers and was a two-time All-Big Ten baseball player, finishing as the second leading hitter in the Big Ten in 1961. After his time at Indiana University, he went on to be a successful businessman in the life insurance business in Indianapolis and worked on several committees to bring professional sports to the area. In 2017, he was inducted into the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame. He is now active in numerous philanthropies involving youth baseball, Indiana University Foundation, Indiana University Athletics, and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, to name just a few. He and his wife, Judy, are the parents of 4 children and 13 grandchildren. It is my privilege to welcome Mr. Bart Kaufman. How are you doing this evening?
Great.
We're really glad to be able to talk some baseball, one of the best sports around. And doing a little bit of research, I saw when you were inducted into the Indiana Baseball Hall of Fame, your friend Del Harris, a great basketball coach, introduced you at the Hall of Fame, and he said this, I quote, "We all love baseball, but nobody loves baseball any more than Bart Kaufman." Sir, how did the love of the game of baseball become so strong in your life?
Well, I started back, I grew up in Shelbyville, and my mother was an avid fan. She came from Cincinnati, and I spent a lot of time at Crosley Field. My dad had a greater interest in basketball. He was very close friends with Branch McCracken. It was my dad that worked with the Indianapolis clergy and with President Wells in getting the Bill Garrett to be the first African-American basketball player in the Big Ten. So our interest in our family was centered around Indiana University athletics in general, basketball in particular. Baseball did not really become into it there because baseball, as I've described many times, at the college level and at Indiana University has always been kind of the redheaded stepchild of the athletic department. The resources were placed into basketball and football. And so baseball, I knew Coach Andres from the standpoint, to give you an idea of the difference between then and now. Ernie, after he finished playing for the Red Sox, and he then was playing and coaching for the Indianapolis Kotskis into the forerunner of the NBA, and he came back to campus for Branch, and he was named baseball coach. This was in 1949, and but that wasn't enough. He had to teach classes. He had a full load of classes to teach, and he was assistant basketball coach. And if you look at the pictures of the national champions in '53, Branch was the head coach, and he only had one assistant coach, and that was Ernie. So, and then Ernie was expected then to coach baseball at the same time that he was going through a national championship run in basketball. So the baseball team didn't have a head coach until the basketball season was over. So baseball didn't have a very high priority on campus.
And yet there were some successful teams on campus. The 1949 team was Big Ten champions, if I'm right. And that was Coach Andrews' first year, right?
Yes. Ernie, that team, which was really comprised the best players, which was continued, were basketball players. Lou Watson was on that team. Don Luff was on that team. Bill Tosheff was on that team. These were all guys from the basketball team. So they won the Big Ten that year, and several of those men were coming back from World War II. And but the thing was, there were no resources allocated to baseball. They just didn't have any. And they played in what was now, it's hard to conceive, but they played what were now the Union parking lot on 7th Street. where the Union is, and they played in that parking lot. And they did not move out onto Fee Lane until right before I came to campus in '58. I imagine they came out in '55 or '6 or something out there. I think more because the Union wanted it as a parking lot, and they took it away from baseball. So baseball had no resources.
And you mentioned the resources. Scholarships for baseball still, in my opinion, are unfair. I think if you put in the time, you should get a little more help. But back in the 50s, there were very, very few scholarships, and which needed the players from other sports, correct?
Well, absolutely. And even the scholarships that were given were partials. So Ernie might have 2 scholarships per year, and he would divide it up among 6 guys. And there was also in the Big Ten now, it's hard to understand this today, but scholarships were based on need. So you couldn't get a scholarship if your family had the means to send you to school. You couldn't qualify anyway. So basically our team was comprised of non-scholarship players. And then what Ernie would do would be to parcel it out among several players. And somebody would get a little help here and a little help there, but he had no support. And then what was an event that made it even worse was for men's baseball. It was good for women's sports, but terrible for minor sports like baseball and tennis. And that was Title IX, because now the athletic department not only had to take care of the men's sports, but the female sports were also given money. So baseball really just had nothing in support, in coaches, in trainers, in uniforms. We had nothing. We bought our own shoes. We bought our own gloves. We had, we were happy to get a hat. We just had it was a very, I like to tell the story, which you and I talked about before. There were a couple of baseball programs in the Big Ten that were historically strong. One was Minnesota. Minnesota had good baseball. And in the spring, they always took a trip. Of course, you couldn't play baseball in Minnesota till mid-April. So they'd send their teams to Florida or to Texas. The University of Michigan had good baseball, and they sent their players there. Indiana, not so much. So when I was a sophomore, there was no spring trip. Western Michigan came to Bloomington for their southern trip, and we had but then when I was a junior, we took a trip. Where did we go? We went to Eastern Kentucky in March with the predictable snow. And then we went to Moorhead. And it was at a signal event that happened at Moorhead because we had played at Richmond, Kentucky to Eastern Kentucky, and we all got on the bus and we went to Moorhead. So we get to Moorhead, and they only had one beat up downtown hotel. You couldn't even call it a hotel. It was more like a boarding house you'd see in an old Western movie. And we got off the bus that night, and one of the players looked around and saw where we were going in his flea trap, and he said, "There are only 9 teams in the Big Ten." And it was true. Here we were going into this dump, and then we get in there, and there was one night clerk who was sleeping, and we woke him up. And he said, Ernie said, "Well, the team's here. We're ready for our rooms." And we all lined up. And we had one black player, a boy from Gary, a nice player. He wasn't a starter, but he was a good guy, and his name was Bob Blacknell. And we had one guy, and the night clerk pointed over at him, and he says, "That nigger can't be here. He can't stay here." And it was wholly embarrassing for all of us. We're standing there. So Ernie didn't know what to do, and he then said, "Can I use your phone?" So he called the coach at Moorhead and said, "I have a Negro boy here, and they won't let him stay here in the hotel." And the coach at Moorhead said, "I'll tell you what we can do. The kids are out of school, it's spring break, so why don't you send him out to the field house, have an infirmary there at the field house, and with hospital beds, and there's nobody in them, and the boy can stay out there." So I said, "He's not staying out there by himself." So we went out. I got 4 other outfielders and Bobby. We all went out there together. Well, it turned out it has a very good ending because it snowed for the 3 days that we were there, so we didn't play. And we were in the field house. And Moorhead has a very nice field house. So we played basketball for 3 days while these other guys, everybody else on the team, was in the hotel in this flea trap. And here we were playing basketball in a first-class facility. But that's what baseball was. And then we went to Louisville, and we were snowed out. And we went to Southern Illinois, and it got snowed out. So everything just was, it was just terrible then. And I'd like to tell the story. We didn't have a scoreboard. Can you imagine playing in a baseball game? We didn't have a scoreboard, except we had a couple pieces of wood that were in center field that you would hang up the number. If his team scored, the operator, so to speak, would take a number and hang it up there for runs and hits and errors. I don't think they even did that. They had maybe just runs. But about the 4th or 5th inning, the kid would leave. It was a high school kid, Bloomington High School or something. He'd get bored standing out there, freezing his rear end off. So he'd leave. And so we never knew the score. So the only way we knew the score is to ask in the bench. So the first thing that I did after I graduated law school and started to make some money is that I gave him a scoreboard, and electric scoreboard. It was a big moment there. We had a scoreboard. But when I played, we didn't have a scoreboard. And that was just indicative of the lack of support that was there. And what happened is that later, the Big Ten Network changed everything. And IU had an athletic director, a couple athletic directors that weren't real popular due to the stuff with Coach Knight. I can't remember the first guy's name. He didn't last very long. Then they got Rick Greenspan. And Rick's son played baseball, and Rick had an interest in baseball. So he had in his mind that they were going to build a new baseball facility, and Title IX was in, so they built a new softball stadium and baseball together, and they'd build them and get it done. But they didn't have any money. They came to me then, and I had planned, I was donating a chair to the School of Business and life insurance, and they couldn't fill the chair. They kept having new deans and new presidents of the university, and they didn't want to teach life insurance anymore. So I had made this commitment, and the money was sitting with the foundation, and Kurt Simic, who is one of the world's great everything's, great guy, great leader, great president of the foundation. He said, "Well, Bart, why don't we we'll build a new baseball field. You'd like that with the money." So I said, fine. Then Terry Klapex became athletic director, and he came to me and he said, "We can't do it. We don't have the money." And Clarence Doninger, he wouldn't do it either. So it wasn't until Greenspan came and the Big Ten Network started to turn out money like an ATM. And they came back to me and said, would you consider doing it again? Well, I'd already given the money to the law school. So the law school had the William Oliver chair of taxation. And so I had to start over. So, but my contribution was minor next to the Big Ten Network. They did a terrific job, and they built that beautiful stadium. And people said to me, well, what did you have to do with it? And I said, I had nothing to do with it. They didn't ask me about anything. I didn't want to know. I didn't want people coming in and say, well, you made the right field too short, or the left field too long, or the lights aren't good, or there aren't enough toilets. When I played, we didn't have any toilets. There were no toilets at Bauer Field when I played. You had a urinal and dugout. But the other people, the fans, whatever showed up, the few people that came, they had to leave if they had to use a restroom. And if we needed to use a restroom, we had to go back, get in a car, and go to the field house. That's where we dressed. We had any showers. We had nothing. And from that to the beautiful facility that's there, thanks to Greenspan, and Fred Glass has been wonderful in supporting it. Now they take more trips. They go to California. They go to Texas. They come to Arizona. They go to Florida, South Carolina. We went to Richmond, Kentucky. That was it. And so they've really done a great job. And we've really...
Despite some of the issues with funding until the Big Ten Network, there were some very good Indiana baseball players, and you mentioned a few. And what made the guys like Ted Kluszewski and Sammy Esposito so great in a situation where they weren't appreciated resource-wise?
Well, the thing was, they didn't come to Indiana for baseball. Neither one did. Kluszewski, who is considerably, he's deceased now, but he was recruited by Bo McMillan to play football. And Sammy Esposito, who played shortstop for the White Sox, he was recruited by Branch to play basketball. In fact, he would have started on the team that won the national championship instead of Burke Scott. Burke Scott, I think, was from Tell City. Sammy Esposito would have been the guard next to Bobby Leonard on that team with Schlunt, Kroc, and Farley. And then he signed. They didn't have the rules then about, and you could sign any time. And he was such a good shortstop that he left. On our baseball team in 61, the best record that Indiana had, and probably the best team they'd ever had up until a few years ago with the Schwarber Travis bunch. That team, we had so many tall baseball players who were pitchers. Ernie Wilhoit was 6'5", Charlie Hall 6'6" or 6'7", Dave Granger 6'8". The next year, Dick Sparks, who was 6'6", 6'7". I mean, we never went to airports because we never flew except to one way. We always had to take the bus. When we went to Minnesota and Iowa, they did let us fly. But every place else, we took the bus. But we went through any kind of a hotel, and it looked like a pro basketball team. And we had all these guys, 6'8", 6'7", 6'9". They were all baseball players. And then also Phil Dickens let the football players play. So there were Luke George, Dave Mount. We had guys who were there. The thing that really made our team rounded out and terrific was the fact of the intelligence of the players. Our shortstop, Bill Ellier, is a doctor today. Our catcher, Bill Boner, is a noted urologist today. Max Bailey platooned at first base in the outfield. He has a PhD, was a professor. We had Bob Reinhardt, who was the best leader I ever played with at any level, who was a coach in the NBA and a college and is a scout now. Riney was our third baseman. He has a master's degree. All these guys were smart, and it really enabled us to, between the football players and the basketball players and the few of us that in effect walked on, we had what turned out to be a terrific team. And it was a wonderful time because we didn't have any support. Nobody came to the games. I mean, our parents came, my mom and dad came, but you
guys were 23-5-1 in that 1961 season. And in looking up that season, you split with Michigan. And you finished, I believe, 11-3 in the Big Ten, which was a game or a half a game out of the championship. And it was the teams you referenced early, Michigan and Minnesota, that was ahead of IU at the time. And what I saw is there were 4 teams from the Midwest District that played to go to the College World Series in 1961. Michigan was one, and they had lost to Western Michigan, which you said had also come down to play at some point. How far do you think this 1961 team could have gone if the tournament had been expanded in like current day 32 or 64 teams? And if you had gotten a chance in there, how good was that 61 team that you were a part of?
Well, what you don't realize, and what today's fans don't realize, is that Indiana University was given the most severe penalty of any university in the history of the NCAA. In the history, you talk about, whoa, SMU got the death penalty in football, but they still let the basketball team play. They still let the baseball team track and everything. But the NCAA came down on Indiana so sternly because of alleged football recruiting. I don't know, it wasn't alleged, they did it. Dickens did it. So the first Dickens was suspended from coaching football his first year. So his line coach, a guy named Bob Hicks, coached football. Then Dickens came back, and instead of, in effect, accepting his penalty that he better not cheat, he just cheated like Rick Pitino and Calipari. So he wasn't going to take anything from the NCAA. So the NCAA said to Indiana University, okay, boys, there were no girls, okay, boys, all sports, baseball, basketball, football, tennis, golf, swimming. It cost Indiana 4 NCAA swimming champions. The 1960 Olympic team was basically the IU swimming team with Frank McKinney and Mike Troy and Alan Summers and that bunch. And and the basketball team, so none of us knew we weren't going to any tournaments. That's what happened with the basketball team. Ohio State won the national championship in 1960 with Jerry Lucas, and Indiana beat them like 18 points the week before the NCAA, and should have beaten them in Columbus if Jerry Bass hadn't thrown the ball away like 5 times in the last minute. But everybody, we all knew we weren't going anyplace. So it never, I mean, Michigan came, both their starting pitchers pitched in the major leagues, a right-hander named Mike Joyce and a left-hander named Fritz Fisher. And their catcher played 18 years for the Tigers in Bill Freehan. And we split with them. And Paul Dean won the second game. We lost the first game to Fisher and beat Joyce in the second game. And Michigan went on. We lost at Minnesota, and we lost at Wisconsin, and we lost to Wisconsin on a freak play where the ball was hit. I was on second base, and the ball was hit to center field, and the center fielder came in and trapped it, and it came out of his glove, and he picked the ball up and put it back in his glove and held it up, and the umpire called him out, called whoever who was following me, called him out, and Ernie went ballistic I saw the ball land on the ground, and he picked it up. But those are the 3 games that we lost. So we were certainly competitive. Whether we would have been competitive with Southern Cal and Texas and Florida, those schools that, I mean, we didn't play any games. We got snowed out. And so, but we were formidable. We had bright guys, good guys. Today we're still friends. I had dinner with Bill Bonert, our catcher. Bill Ilya is using my tickets for the Illinois game this weekend. We're still, Dick Sparks and I are in touch. Sparks was a freshman then. He came on the next year in 62, and he could throw the ball harder than anybody I ever saw. And we played against a lot of guys that pitched in the major leagues. Nobody could throw as hard as Dick Sparks. And but he was a basketball player. He played with the Van Arsdales and John McLaughlin. Ernie never had a chance to scout. Our best scholarship player was a guy named Eddie LeDuc, who we used to call him Stump. He used to be 5'6". He's probably 5'3" now, I imagine. I haven't seen him, but he can't be very big. But he could hit. He was All-American, and he could play second base. Ernie took him he went to New Albany High School. Ernie never saw him play. Imagine giving a guy a half scholarship. He never even saw the guy play. He just heard that he was a nice player, and he offered him a scholarship. But Ernie couldn't scout. He didn't have summer baseball. Before I had that good year in my junior year, the summer before, I went to Europe all summer. I was on a student tour. I didn't touch a baseball at the time school was out till I came back. There weren't these travel squads and things. I mean, that's what's made baseball great. We didn't have guys from Indiana playing in the major leagues then like we do now with the different guys that are playing. Must be a half a dozen kids playing high school baseball now that are playing in the leagues. Well, we didn't have that. There were very few because there was no summer baseball. I played in Shelbyville. They never had any summer baseball. There was none. I went to summer. My dad sent me to Dodgertown with the Vero Beach. I went like a summer camp for 8 weeks because of Carl Erskine. That's where I learned to play baseball. The baseball coach at Shelbyville High School, he was an assistant basketball coach. They gave him probably $200 to coach baseball. He never cared. He never went to a Cincinnati Reds game. He never listened to a game. He wouldn't pay attention to the World Series. He had been a baseball fan. He took the $250 and he coached baseball. Well, needless to say, he's not teaching us very much. And
what was it like? Excuse me. What was it like playing for Ernie Andrus?
Ernie was a guy.
And how did he help you as a player?
Well, Ernie was first of all, he was a good guy. Ernie, he wasn't a Coach Knight type guy or an Archie Miller kind of guy with intensity. Ernie was, first of all, a gentleman and a nice man. He was not a baseball savant. He wasn't La Russa or Sparky Anderson or that. What Ernie did is that he was a good leader and a good guy. You could trust him. He had confidence in us. He let us play. Now, were we at the top of the hit and run and hitting behind the runner and moving runners along and stuff like that? No. Tell the story. Dick Persinger, who died a few years ago, told the story. He's pitching against, I don't know, Wisconsin or Michigan or something. He's walked like two guys in a row. And Ernie walks out to the mound and he says, he didn't say, gosh darn it. He used the harder word. And he said, gosh darn it, Persinger, throw strikes. And Persinger turns around to Bonert and says, what in the hell does he think I'm trying to do? And that was the kind of leader that Ernie was. He wasn't a leader in the way of Tracy Smith or Chris Lamonis. Ernie was a good man, a nice guy, had a lot of confidence in us. It was fun to play for him. I loved him. I did the eulogy at his funeral. He was Doris, his wife, is like 96 or 7, still alive, still plays bridge every day. I'm still in touch with her. She lives in Atlanta with her daughter. Ernie was a wonderful, wonderful man. But I will tell you this about guys who played for him. I've always had a philosophy that if you play for a coach and you do well, you're pretty much like the coach. And if you sit on the bench and you're not playing, not so much. And I think that's the way it is for the guys that played for Coach Knight. I think that's going to be the way it is with a lot of coaches and players. If you play and you have success, they like you're happy, and if you're not, not. So we won with Ernie. He was always a gentleman. He treated us well. He was interested in the kids having enough money to have lunch and stuff. Guys would tell stories. He never did do this with me, but because my dad was a man of means, and Ernie would give guys money so they could fix their car and stuff. It was all illegal. They weren't getting anything anyway. But if you had a flat tire, Ernie would take care of them. And I mean, he was just out of his own pocket. There was no money out of the Big Ten. he just did it because he cared about the children. And I loved it. I loved the man.
How did let's talk a little bit about yourself as a player? What were your strengths, and what was something that you constantly had to work on, and then follow that up with, if you would please, playing baseball and attending IU. How did that help you as an adult in both life and business?
Well, playing baseball, I was right before the designated hitter came in, and I was before the draft. When I played, the teams would sign you. The Red Sox were very much a factor because Ernie had played for the Red Sox. So there was the best player that ever played for Ernie was a guy named Bob Lawrence, who then succeeded Ernie as a coach, and a real good guy. Well, Lawrence played in the Red Sox. I don't think he ever got to the major leagues. If he did, it was for the proverbial cup of coffee. But I played in left field, and I could hit. But there were 5 tools that even today in baseball they want when they want a player. They want the ability to hit, the ability to hit with power, the ability to run, the ability to catch the ball, and the ability to throw. So they want 5 tools. So Mickey Mantle and Mike Trout, Ken Griffey Jr., they have 5 tools. I had 2. I had 2 tools. I could run, and now I can hardly walk after having 5 joint replacements. But then I could run, and I could hit. I wasn't hitting with power much, but that could have come as I got older. I was the youngest player on the team and in my class all the time because I had just turned 17 when I came to college. So I was younger than, we had one guy on our team, a real good guy, Jerry Flanagan. He was like 26 or 80. We'd been in service. We had Jerry Gates, who was that old. So here I'm playing with guys 7, 8 years older than I am. So they're men. I'm a boy. And there were no weightlifting or anything then. I never lifted a weight in my life. The only guys that lifted weights were the football players. The basketball players never lifted weights. The swimmers, none of them ever lifted weights. So, and I was a below average outfield. I just had hands of stone. The first time that Gene Ring, who was the freshman coach, saw me in the outfield, he'd been good friends with, he played with Bill Garrett and Lou Watson. He was good friends with my dad. And he saw me in the outfield, and he used to call me Cough. And he'd say, Cough, you got to get a bigger glove. Because, I was just, but Ernie never took me out for defensive purposes because I could hit. But, so I really only had 2 tools. I could hit. And it was fun. And then when I was first started, I was platooned. And then when I came back as a senior, Ernie said, you're batting 4th, and whether it's going to be against right-handed, I batted left-handed, you're right-handed or left-handed pitching, you're batting 4th. So I wasn't so sure, but I hit left-handers just as well as I hit right-handers. And that was Ernie who had the confidence in me that I could do it. When I graduated, I would have loved to have played professional baseball. Some of the guys did, but they never got very high. Sparks did. Our pitcher, a guy named Bobby Marr from Louisville, who was our Friday ace. He was a true Friday ace. He was just our Friday pitcher. But he had a bad back and used to, by the end of the season, he was sleeping on the floor before the games, things. He signed with the Red Sox at the end of the season. LeDuc signed, but they were sent to Dubuque, Iowa and stuff like that. And they hung around for a couple of years. Dean did too. But my wife had no interest in, I was just getting married, and she had no interest in living in Morristown, Tennessee for the summer. She was from Indianapolis and from a nice family, and that wasn't in her plan. So, and Vietnam was there, and I was ready to go into service, but I went to law school, and then we had a child. So I graduated and I joined my dad in business. And the guys that we've stayed together, close friends forever, this team of guys who cared about each other. I could only hope for the guys that are playing now that these guys, as they go forward, they can retain the friendships that are there. And because it was a wonderful time. And the fact that I had success, I wanted, I was one of the few people that not only that I loved to play, I went to Dodger Town with the Dodgers to first of all, as a child in summer camp for 8 weeks for 5 summers, and then went back as an instructor. Then I went to baseball, to fantasy camp for 25 years. And my wife used to say every time I came home, I had to have another body part replaced. I'd have a shoulder replaced or a hip replaced. But I loved it. Play for a week, act like a fool. Finally, I got to be 72. I was playing with, went to the Reds fantasy camp, the Dodgers, because they went to California, closed up at Vero Beach. And a good friend of mine, Marv Bettinger, and I went to the Reds camp. But at 72, I couldn't hit anymore. It was very disappointing. I thought I'd be able to hit till I was 90, but at 72, I guess I was done. So I was finished. But I loved it, and I followed baseball. We tried to get baseball to come to Indianapolis, and I was ahead of a group. We had a deal made with the Oakland Athletics to come to Indianapolis in 1981, and they had all these guys, McGuire and Canseco and Catfish Hunter and all these great players, and they were dying at the gate in Oakland. And the family, the Haas family, wanted to sell them, and I had a deal made to buy 40% of the team for $10 million. I didn't have $10 million, but the Simon family did. They owned the Pacers and the shopping centers, and Fred, one of the 3 brothers, was going to be part of it. He was going to be president. I was going to be general manager. And we had the deal, and the Haas agreed to it. And Herb Simon sat down at a meeting with me and said, "Bart, baseball's boring." I said, "Herb, did you ever watch the Pacers on the second night of a back-to-back and see, you talk about boring, and you don't want to have baseball in Indianapolis?" Well, Mayor Hudnut had wanted to play in the Hoosier Dome, but it wouldn't have worked. It was too small. The footprint wasn't big enough. We thought because they could play in Seattle and Minneapolis in domes that they could play in Indianapolis. But the Hoosier Dome, because of the railroad on the south side, wasn't big enough. So it wouldn't have worked anyway. And besides, baseball's a flawed sport because financially it's great in Chicago, it's great in New York, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Milwaukee, not so much. And so we were in trouble.
You're talking about stadiums, and I appreciate your time here. I got to ask you, you mentioned earlier that you are the benefactor with the name on our baseball stadium, but I've also found out that you have graciously donated to other stadiums in the state of Indiana, in the Indianapolis area. Why is giving back to baseball such an important part of who you are?
Well, giving back, period, is. My dad was a wonderful man, period. He was born in Poland, came here in 1907. He was 4 years old. He spent a lot of his time in community stuff, and he loved Indiana University. He never spent a day in Indiana University other than in a seat at a game. And so I felt that it was important. The baseball, I gave at Marion College, the stadium there, at the Jewish Community Center. I wanted to do the baseball stadium back in the 90s, and it's been a dream to me. I can tell you, every time I listen to one of your podcasts or turn on and listen to or read in the paper and the Daily Student or something, and it says they're going to play at Bart Kaufman Field, I just laugh. I just am so happy. As I'm here in Arizona now, and I'm coming home this week. We've been here all winter, and every time I hear him talk about the Bart Kaufman Field, I just laugh. I'm just so happy that they have such a nice place, and that thanks to Fred Glass I have a tremendous respect for Tracy Smith, the job that Chris has done in at succeeding Tracy, and to see Indiana being mentioned in the top 10 or 15 teams in the country, the top 25 in the RPI. This is wonderful, and I encourage all the alumni. Kurt Simic, who headed the foundation for forever, was just a terrific leader and cared about the university. And I have helped in raising lots of money for the university because I'm so proud of the university. It's a wonderful university. It's a wonderful part of our state, and I just can't think of a better place to donate money than Indiana University. So it's been my privilege.
Well, we are honored that you wanted to come on with us rookie podcasters talking Hoosier baseball, and we want to take your lead and promote Indiana baseball as well as Indiana University. And you said you're not hitting anymore, but sir, I would disagree. I think you're a big hit, and you're giving back to communities and to Indiana University will be a hit for a long time continuing. We're better off because of your service, and Indiana baseball appreciates that. I know the fans do, and we appreciate you watching the podcast. So please stop by. We have tailgates on Saturday games. If you get back in town May and make it down to the Bart, we'd love to host you for a tailgate. But last question, and I'll let you go. Or go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What advice would you give to young athletes, young baseball, those players at Indiana University who are playing right now? What advice would you give to those athletes that you've learned through your life and through baseball?
Well, the first thing is you got to get your education. You got to finish. One of the people that I've taken an interest in and I'm very fond of is Scott Efros, who pitched a couple of years ago. And Scott signed after his junior year. And I was on his case about get that degree. And he was busy. He was pitching in South Bend, and he was pitching in I went to see him in South Bend. Then he was pitching in Myrtle Beach, and now he's pitching in Tennessee. But he comes here with the Cubs in spring training. And I've been encouraging him to get his degree, and he has. And that was the first thing he told me when he saw me. He said, "Bart, I got my degree," and I'm very proud of him. And so the first thing is you got to get an education because there's so few Schwarbers on earth. And so get your degree. Secondly, if you want to play baseball, there's no better place to play than here, especially if you're from the state of Indiana. Do I think that if you're from New Orleans, you ought to come to Indiana? No. If you're from Austin, Texas, I think you can have better choices. I was very surprised that some of the, like Feynman, came from California to Bloomington. He must have some kind of a wish for cold weather. I mean, he come, but I was sure glad he did. But the kids in Indiana, I don't know why in the heck that any kid from Greensburg wants to go to Lexington. I don't know why anybody from northern part of the state wants to go to LSU. They may play a few more games, but hey, if you're going to live in Indiana, there's no better place to be than to go to school in Indiana and then have your lifelong friends in Indiana. And so my advice is get that degree and stay home.
Thank you, sir. And hang on after I shut off the recorder here because I'd like to follow up on a few things. But thanks again for joining us. It was an honor to talk baseball and your life and the things that you've given back to our communities. This has been a very special edition of Talking Hoosier Baseball on Sports Talk with Tonsoni. Special thank you to Jared Morris of the Assembly Call for introducing me to Mr. Kaufman and helping to arrange this interview. Please follow us on Twitter at @CUAtTheBart and at SportsTons, and share with us your thoughts. And until next time, we will see you at the Bart. Go Hoosiers.